If you ever thought to yourself, alternative music is good, but it's never going to be as catchy as mainstream pop, behold, something that scratches that alternative itch, and it's catchy as fuck, right here. Welcome to Everyone Does Music. We're checking out the fourth studio album from Poppy called Flux. This LP follows the previous album, I Disagree's vibe of diving into more alternative topics as opposed to the original pop sensibilities that Poppy showed in her early tracks and albums, and just really getting down to something more, again, alternative and a little more punk-oriented, especially this time around. I Disagree took the slight curvature and slight left turn that her sophomore album, Am I a Girl, took, and drove immediately straight into traffic, taking on some hard rock and metal influences. And it's truly been a journey seeing Poppy go from this dreamy pop artist to a more hard-edged rock and metal artist to now somebody who's finally has found what seems to be her true niche here in the grungy punk aesthetic. From subtle subgenre exploration to full-on dives such as Scary Mask earlier in her career, it's all led up to where we are now, and it's all led up to Flux. So let's talk about Flux. I mentioned that I Disagree was an abrupt, albeit welcome turn into traffic, and it really was. It captured what it felt like to sort of depart from something you used to be a part of, sort of shackled down and made to be this product of, and it felt like the true rebellious type of energy you get about yourself when you finally dive into something you've been wanting to do for a long time. You dive into something new and you're all in. You're all about doing everything in your power to find this new identity, and while that parts of that identity have seeped into this album, it feels like I Disagree was more of a step along the path as opposed to the steps towards the end of the path. One thing that I Disagree really missed though was the catchiness of early songs such as Low Life, Bubble Bath, stuff like that. Of course, Poppy's earlier work being, like I said earlier, pop music really made it inherently catchy and inherently easy to get stuck in your head. So it's a little harder, albeit it can happen with metal and rock music, but I Disagree didn't really have too many tracks that really stuck too much to my head, stuck too much to my brain, and made me go back and say, oh yeah, I need to hear that part again. Great album, and I'd revisit it, but nothing quite stuck in my head like the original material Poppy and her former musical allies Titanic Sinclair made. By the way, can I get a fuck Titanic Sinclair? But these feelings of catchiness and immediate stuck in your head readiness come back in full force here on this album. Hysteria is a great unapologetic example of this. It gives off a very sing-songy vibe as well as just proving to be a pretty great track on its own without that sing-songy elements. And although the instrumental section behind the vocals is kind of simple in structure, that structure does serve a greater purpose here. This song feels like it melded perfectly in with older Poppy songs such as Interweb or Computer Boy in terms of how, like I've said it already 3 times in this review probably, but just the immediate catchiness, the immediate recognizability that sticks with you and makes you want to go back to the track because you can't get it out of your head. And I'm going to try not to focus too much on the comparison between this current material and the older material besides this little introduction here, but I do just want to say that this piece sort of gives you a not nostalgic feeling, but something similar to nostalgia in the case that if you maybe fell off because I Disagree was too much of an immediate turn into that type of music, whether you listen to that music or not, it might have felt a little too jarring here. Songs like Hysteria here give you that feeling that it has some very specific, very certain, and hand-picked moments of the earlier Poppy material fusing with this new genre and this new era. And in comparison to that, this next track coming in has a complete opposite effect of the almost complacent lull that Hysteria gave you, and it's more rushed rhythm, and it's dedicated to producing more anticipation as opposed to instant payoff. The song Her is a little shorter, it sits on the side of the fence that's a little like quicker and blink and you'll miss it in nature, especially as the album itself only clocks in at just over half an hour, but it's a thought-provoking track and one that sits at the top of my favorites in this album for sure. This song feels, at least to me, equally a letter to yourself or Poppy herself, as well as a letter of confrontation to somebody else. Now, this could be me reading too much into it, but after reading some discussion on forums online, as well as a Genius lyric page, I think that part of this song might be in reference, either direct or loose reference, to her former partner and musical collaborator, Titanic Sinclair. My favorite line here speaks volumes to that subject matter I just brought up. It comes right at the beginning. Here it is. I'm gonna read it off. Give her a face, give her a name that isn't hers, then make it yours, say she's adored, call her a whore, then pick her up, throw her on the floor. These lines paint, again, what I seem to get here, an easy to understand picture about abuse, perhaps both physical and mental in nature. But like I said, maybe I'm reading too much into it. There's a sort of line that Poppy said, I think about this album actually, where very loosely quoted it said, did I feel like I was being controlled or did people perceive me as being controlled? Really makes you think, really makes you thonk your thinks, huh? Themes of bending to different places and events in time or responding in the form of a flux like the album's name, are found all throughout the tracks here. I think the most interesting take on this sort of idea and conception is in one of the ending tracks, Never Find My Place. Poppy is known for being sort of vague and sort of like leading you along before hitting you with the eventual payoff and the eventual revelation and reveal of what the song's subject matter is about. This song comes off in an unusually blatant way that's really interesting to see. The song tackles self-preservation and reassurance in the face of adversity, and just from the surface matter, just the top of the water, you understand the message being told here. And that message isn't just put out with a mediocre or lackluster background music tracking. There's some really great song structure here done here, excuse me. And I'd like to give a little shout out to the keyboardist and drummer from what I believe is just in studio here, Ted Gowan and Ralph Alexander, respectively. They add so much to the song, and oftentimes with solo projects, it feels like, whether it is just the one person doing something or one person with studio backup musicians, it feels like oftentimes all the focus is on that singer, the vocals, the lyrics, and not as much attention and care is given to the background elements such as the instruments. But here it feels like they're on par with each other and complementing each other in a very band-like way, a very organic way. The vocal presentation blends in with the instruments without a fail, without any signs of slipping up or struggling to keep pace with each other. Like I said, you have artists like Hayley Williams or Ed Sheeran, which, for better and for worse, it feels like it's laser focused on just the singing, on just the vocals, and you don't really get too much of a look into what's happening behind that, what's serving to complement that. Sometimes that can make a song suffer, or it can improve a song on very, very rare occasions where all you need is just to listen to what the person is singing to you. But right here, like I said, the cohesion and the sense of working together as opposed to against each other here pays off in the best way. I think Flux overall is a presentation on growth and the constant evolution that Poppy and the person behind the character, behind Poppy, has taken over the course of her life and her musical career thus far. I think over the years, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we kind of look at Poppy as a sort of ethereal, not quite inhuman, but just different entity. And it felt like that was very attached to the music. Like, you couldn't enjoy the music if you didn't understand what Poppy was, what the companion videos on YouTube had, or what even as recently as her graphic novels had to offer you. It felt like you had to take in every bit of the character and the presentation under that name in order to fully enjoy the music that was being shown here. And no matter if the barrier was just a little thin, just barely there, or a little thicker, it felt like that was even on I Disagree a little bit, where it felt like we're still just getting a character, we're still getting this sort of fiction piece as opposed to letting her personal feelings blend in. Of course, I think you can attribute that to being in the position she was and just coming out of that position she was in. And while it's not entirely negative, it's not a negative thing. I mean, Poppy essentially made herself the queen of her own image. She made herself the queen of her own design and her own realm in these ways. I think the previously explored elements of control and rage, and I disagree. I said I would stop making comparisons, and I apologize for not stopping. I feel like that all comes to fruition, and this is the outcome, aftermath, and results of all of that here on Flux. And I think the sort of feeling of evolution and coming to the end of a road like that really comes out in a song like Bloom. Bloom serves as something that still retains the sort of mystery and otherworldly feeling that previous material has had in the past, but it also feels like a good piece of what is Poppy now, who she is now, who she's going to be from here on out, who she's been working to become. The song's very similar with this message of sort of taking back your identity, taking back who you were, blooming on your own, growing on your own. That was previously discussed in the track Like Her, and it's really just a very easy to take in, easy to vibe to, and just enjoy song. It's a song where you can feel good listening to it, as opposed to the sort of buzzing anxiety, for better or for worse, that comes with this album. It's a very healthy thing to sort of take back and reclaim the energy that you put into something or someone else. And I think that's what this track really goes on to explain. One last thing I want to touch on before wrapping things up is a song that feels wildly individual, not quite different from the rest of the album's material, but stands on its own and could have been a one-off release, sort of similar to songs like Quarantine by Blink-182, or I think She's a God by Neck Deep was a solo single too. It's a song that feels like it could stand just as well as part of an album as opposed to just a song isolated and by itself. And this song is so mean. It comes in pretty early, shaking things up with a very interesting vocal melody. And while it doesn't feel like it fits in quite right, again, it's very different, it's very individualistic. It has instrumental moments that feel really similar to Never Find My Place, which makes it fit into the puzzle of the album Flux a lot easier. Another shout out to somebody in the background in the studio and production phase of things. Daryl Thorpe did some mixing magic in studio, making this song feel like it's part of a swarm of many different songs, but it lets itself stray off. It lets itself kind of stay off from the pack, but it can return to the pack at any time. I think that Poppy is an artist that will, over the next few years, really race for a big four membership when it comes to like the big names in alternative music. And every single year, it feels like that group of big four changes year to year. Like you could go back in a few years ago and say that bands like Pierce the Veil or Sleeping with Sirens or Black Veil Brides were at the core of the scene. It feels like Poppy, if not already, is making a case that she's next in line to be part of that big four. If I had to pick right now, I can only really name two artists that immediately stand out as definite big names in the scene, like big, like 1000% everybody at least knows about them. That would be Bring Me the Horizon and Dance Gavin Dance. Bands like Sleeping with Sirens and more recently Pierce the Veil talking about producing a new album. They're still big names, but they're not as in constant conversation, not constantly doing things, as opposed to Bring Me the Horizon constantly evolving themselves and Dance Gavin Dance constantly doing something. But I'm getting off track here. Regardless, Big Poppy, she is coming for that big four membership. She's coming for the Mount Rushmore of alternative music, and there's nothing we can do to stop her. And honestly, I welcome our new ruler. Her constant ability and desire to try something new on every release, even after her rebirth, is an incredible thing to take in, both as a fan, as a critic, and just a music lover in general. Even if you don't like the music, you gotta appreciate just the work she puts in every single time. I don't think she's quite hit the plateau yet. I think there's still a mountaintop for her to stand atop on and say, hey, I've reached perfection. This is a wonderful album nonetheless, and for that reason, I'm giving Flux by Poppy an 8.3 out of 10. And that's it, that's the review. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. If you think I missed something or you want to discuss something I talked about down in the comment section below. Let's get a conversation started. I try to reply or at least like every comment I get on the channel. If I miss you, sorry. Regardless though, stay hydrated, have a great day. I'll see you next time. I'm out of Monster and I'm sad.